Ah, the smartphone. How did we ever get by without it? Many kids can't imagine how it would feel. They've never known life without the constant lure of the internet and the instant gratification of messaging. But national test scores are down, and mental health struggles among teens are on the rise. And much of the blame points to the distraction and skewed reality of social media that lives in the palm of our hands. Today, there's a growing call to take phones away from kids, at least while they're in the classroom. 8 states have taken action, and many more are considering it. What are the pros and cons to this debate? What seems to work and what doesn't? That's the topic of this month's KidNuz Convos. I'm Tori. It's a complicated issue, and I wanted to talk with an expert who could share with us various viewpoints. So I reached out to Julie Jargon, who is the family and tech columnist of the Wall Street Journal. She's done a lot of research and written many excellent articles on this topic, and I'm so glad to speak with you. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
A recent poll shows 97% of 11 to 17-year-olds use their phones during school time for an average of 43 minutes. That's almost a whole school period. So when did this issue first get on your radar?
Well, when students returned to in-person class after the pandemic, I began hearing about how attached they had become to their phones and how it was causing more disruption and distraction in school. And certainly kids had phones even pre-pandemic, but it was really after kids returned and had been spending so much time on their devices during the pandemic that it seemed like this issue became more of a problem at schools.
So were you hearing complaints from teachers or students or parents? What first brought it to your attention?
I was hearing complaints from teachers and from parents. I had profiled a private boarding school in Massachusetts that was very early in implementing a student cell phone ban. It seemed like kind of a wild idea at that time. That was back in 2022. And they found that at first students were terrified at the idea of not having their phones with them in class. But as they got into the school year, they found that students were talking to each other again during the day. And students themselves said that they felt a sense of relief about not having to be beholden to their phones all the time. So that was an early indicator of what was to come.
So to get to the heart of the matter, you just spoke about a few of the positive reasons for banning a phone. But can you kind of flesh out what are the main arguments for banning phones from the classroom?
There are a few. One of the big reasons is that they cause distraction. So, when you have your phone available to you during class, it's very tempting to want to, watch YouTube on it, text your friends, check social media. So that has led to a lot of kids not paying attention in class and losing out on learning opportunities and creating frustration with a teacher who's in front of the classroom trying to teach to kids who've got their heads down looking at their phones. Also, like with this school in Massachusetts that I wrote about, one of their main reasons for deciding to take phones away was that they were noticing a lack of social engagement on campus. And that has been, happening at schools all over the country, public schools, private schools, everywhere, where I've heard a lot of students and teachers say that when phones are present, kids don't talk as much to each other during passing periods or during lunch or PE. And they find that when they take phones away, kids start talking to each other again. And then there's the additional problem of phones creating drama. There can be drama in group chats, there can be bullying, kids recording fights on their phones. So there's just a lot of issues that happen when phones are not used in an appropriate way. And that spills over into, the school day where, it creates disciplinary problems that the administrators have to deal with.
Yeah, CBS reported that Kansas City charter school banned phones after a pilot study in 2023, and one ninth grade class showed those phone-free students had the highest GPA in the whole school. That's so concrete. So it seems like there's some really obvious reasons to ban phones. What are some of the reasons or the reluctance to not ban phones?
A lot of the reluctance around banning phones actually comes from parents. A lot of parents really want to be able to reach their kids during the day. They have a number of concerns. They're worried about their child's safety, or they want to remind them to turn in an assignment, or tell them that they're running late for pickup. So there are reasons of convenience. And, a lot of parents got used to being with their kids all day during COVID and have had a hard time separating when the kids went back to school. So parents and kids are constantly connected. And so for some people, It feels a little uncomfortable to not be able to reach their children when they've been used to doing so. So that's kind of the number one reason it's come up as an argument for not banning phones.
Yeah, or kids dealing with after school jobs or sick families say they also need smartphones. And the thing is, when my kids were young, before smartphones, you could call the office to leave a message for your kids. So, this new desire for parents, I guess, to always be connected, I've heard it described as an umbilical cord.
It absolutely is like an umbilical cord, and you can still call the front office. They still answer their phones, and they will still get a message to your child if you need to say you're running late, or there's been a change in people who are picking up your kiddo after school. So, that still works. I've experienced that myself with my kids. Both I've had them call me to ask where I am when I've been running late, and I've had the situation where I've had to call the front office for different reasons. So it still works to pick up the phone and actually call the front office of your kid's school.
Yeah, kind of the old fashioned way. So, there really are three groups involved in this: teachers, parents, and students. And you interviewed a teacher in Arizona who quit last year because apparently he was so tired of being the phone police.
That's right. There's so many teachers, and this man that I interviewed exemplifies what I've heard from so many teachers, that they are really tired of enforcing their own phone use policies in class. A lot of schools that don't have a uniform policy, they leave it up to each individual teacher to come up with their own rules. And that's hard to do when, if kids are used to using their phone pretty freely in one class, and then they get to your classroom, and you ask them to put their phones in a basket or keep them in their backpacks. It's really hard to enforce when there's no consistency across the school. So yes, a lot of teachers find it really frustrating to be the enforcers of their own phone use rules, and it takes away from instructional time when they have to pause and tell one student to put their phone away. And it just gets really tiring. And yeah, you're right. This one teacher that I profiled, he decided to leave his job because it just got to be too much.
Yeah, that's sad. There's such a serious shortage of teachers. Now, as far as students, you've talked to quite a few. What are they telling you?
Yeah, initially, like as was the case with this Massachusetts school that I wrote about early on, when you first talk about a phone ban, the initial reaction tends to be, no, we don't want that. We don't want to be without our phone. We're so used to it that we need it. But then I found that once phone bans are implemented, many students have a change of heart and say that they feel relieved. It's a lot of pressure on students to feel like they have to check their phones constantly, to be up with what's going on, to hit like on their friend's post, or to comment on a friend's post, or to respond to text messages. They feel compelled to respond right away to messages. And so when you take that pressure away, a lot of students tell me that they just actually feel relieved about it, and they enjoy talking with their friends again, and not being so isolated in their phones. So I'm sure not all students everywhere are thrilled with this even after it happens, but yeah, the main thing I hear is that there's a level of acceptance after it happens, and especially when it's happening for everybody. If you're the one kid that's not bringing your phone to class and everyone else has them, then you feel left out. But if the policy is that no one has their phones out, then everyone's in the same boat, and they find that it's actually nice to have conversations with their classmates again.
Right, a serious case of FOMO. Right now, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about how to handle this kind of change. Julie Jargon of the Wall Street Journal will talk about what seems to be working best in schools around the country. KidNuz Convos continues right after this.
Today's KidNuz Convos episode is brought to you in part by a generous donation from the Nicholas B. Ottaway Foundation, committed to improving communities and impacting lives through 3 unique philanthropic efforts focused on education, journalism, and community impact. We are grateful for their support and the support of all our generous donors.
And we're back with more of KidNuz Convos. I'm Tori, and I'm talking to Julie Jargon, who's the Wall Street Journal columnist on family and technology. We're talking about smartphones and the possible ban in schools. As I mentioned at the start, there are 8 states that are banning smartphones in classrooms. It sounds like a big challenge, though. What seems to be the growing consensus on how to handle this situation?
Yeah, different schools have tried different things, and one administrator that I spoke to said that what seems to work well is when you start off with sort of a pilot program, that if you just launch into it saying we're going to ban phones next school year, you get all of this resistance. But if you start off by saying we're going to do a pilot with maybe a few classes or one grade level for a particular period of time, that he said you generally get more acceptance. And then when you can show some data after that time period, such as the example you cited where students increase their GPA after that period, if the administrators can show parents that school disciplinary actions have gone down, that grades have gone up, that test scores have gone up, then you start to get more buy-in. So that was one bit of advice that I heard, that, kind of taking some baby steps and showing that it actually does work, instead of, just saying we're doing this, that you tend to get more acceptance.
Right.
And there are also different ways of going about it. Some school offices, have the kids, and this, is easier to do at smaller schools, have the kids drop off their phones in the front office during the day. A lot of schools don't want to have that liability of holding on to a student's device. So a lot of schools have turned to these pouches that kids can carry around their phone with them during the day, but it's locked inside of a pouch and it can't be unlocked until the end of the school day. So the device is still with the student during the day, but it's not accessible.
I mean, kids are pretty clever. They can have a second phone and put their one phone in the pouch and carry the other one around. So it seems like it's always going to be a challenge that schools need to face.
Yeah, students will always find workarounds. I mean, people have ripped apart these pouches. People have gotten burner phones to use instead. But if school has a pretty solid policy and they enforce it well, they can usually nip that kind of stuff in the bud. But yeah, it does happen. There's always going to be somebody who doesn't like a policy and will find a way to get around it.
So I have a couple questions from our listeners. Lainey from Oakland, California wants to know if a school-wide ban would impact faculty.
In some cases, yes. So back to that private boarding school that I wrote about from Massachusetts, they decided to enact a phone ban for everyone, including faculty. It's unclear if all the other phone bans that are being enacted right now around the country will also apply to faculty. I think it's mostly students, but individual districts might decide, or individual schools might decide to apply it to faculty as well. But certainly in some cases, that's the case.
And Ray, also from Oakland, was curious if schools are considering also banning smartwatches.
Some schools do lock up smartwatches as well, but many still allow them. I mean, they can't do as much as the phone. It's a lot harder to text people and use really any kind of apps on a smartwatch. So while they can be distracting as well, they're certainly not as problematic. So I think that school districts are starting mostly with phone bans. Smartwatches might come down the road if those, are distracting in the classroom. But yeah. I haven't heard too much about smartwatches being included.
Now, some educators say that smartphones aren't going away and kids need to learn to manage their time on it. But it seems like this is a great way to get kids to realize there are times you just need to put the phone away.
Yeah, and that's kind of goes to a rule that a lot of families have about not having your phone out at the dinner table, for example, or when you're at a restaurant. So I think part of teaching kids about appropriate phone use and time management is to show them there are specific activities and times where you just don't use your phone at all. Not so much that you need to manage how much time you spend on them altogether, but that there are times where you absolutely just set it aside, which could be, during dinner. It's not about like, can I be on my phone for 15 minutes during dinner? It's not, no, like some families say, no, dinner time is a sacred time where we don't use our phones at all and we talk to each other. So I think that same argument is being made for schools. School is a time for learning, and that is a time to get into the habit of setting your phone aside, which could help set up kids for success if they go to college. And no one really can tell them what to do then. They're on their own. So if maybe they develop the habit of setting aside their phone during class time, maybe it'll be second nature to not bring it to their college classes. It's also a distraction in college. I hear that a lot from college professors. So there are a lot of kids that haven't learned this by the time they get to college, and they're not talking to each other in college classrooms, and they're not paying attention to their professor. And they or their parents are spending a lot of money for their college education. So it is an important skill to learn for later in life, or when you're in the workforce. There are times of day when it's not a good idea to be on your phone all the time because you're not going to get your work done.
Yeah, there's, whether it's a high school class or a business meeting, there are times you just need to put the phone and all other distractions away so your brain can focus on only one thing at a time. And I read it could take 20 minutes to refocus once you've been distracted.
Yeah, absolutely. Plenty of adults struggle with this just the way kids do. And we're all getting dings on our phone all day long and notifications that draw our attention, and it distracts us. So yeah, I think the idea is to get kids to be able to learn how to focus early on so that they can have a better handle on their tech use as they get older, because certainly a lot of adults, myself included, struggle with this.
So to wrap it up, is there, in all the research you've done, does it seem like there's a winning formula on how to manage this? Or is it best for schools and districts to kind of customize their own policy?
Yeah, I would say there's never sort of a one size fits all solution to anything. I mean, there maybe are different considerations in different places, depending on, what parents want and how the administrators want to work with the school community. But the idea of in some way setting the phones aside physically during the school day seems to be what a lot of schools are moving toward, rather than saying, kids, leave them in your locker or leave them in your backpack or leave them at home. That's a harder thing to enforce than having the kids actually hand over their phones or lock them up somehow where they can't physically access them. That seems to be where a lot of the schools are moving towards something like that, because leaving the enforcement up to individual teachers to uphold is not working. Just having sort of a general policy of, oh, kids are supposed to have their phones in their locker or their backpack during the day, that doesn't seem to be working. Kids are pulling them out anyway. And then again, that puts the teachers in the position of having to stop class and tell that student, hey, your phone needs to be in your backpack or out of sight. So it really seems like what does seem to work is physically putting the phones away and having the schools do that in some sort of uniform way.
Well, this has been a great conversation. Thank you so much for joining us, Julie.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
And thank you for listening. If you'd like to let us know what you think about this episode, please drop us a line at wehearyou@kidnuz.org. And don't forget to tune in to our regular daily Kid News podcast every Monday through Friday for fresh, current news that's tailored just for kids. Have a great day.